unfortunately, Steve Babbage from the Etsy Sage group cannot be with us today, but we'll have a video later on. But our first speaker is Kenny Paterson, and is going to talk us, to describe and give us some insights about the CFRG. So please welcome Kenny Paterson.
Thank you very much. Okay, can you hear me okay at the back? It's on? Great. There are plenty of seats at the front if you come in late, and I'll embarrass you as you come in. That's okay, so I'm going to talk about the Crypto Forum Research Group. You'll notice our logo. This logo was designed by David McGrew. Do any of you recognize what this is? What I noticed actually today, which is really positive, is there's a lot of young researchers in the crowd. I think some of them are required to be here by their funding rules, but anyway, they're here. And maybe they don't get so much exposure anymore to linear feedback shift registers, but that's an LFSR. So David McGrew designed this logo, and I'm going to use it throughout the talk. So here's an overview. I'm going to talk very briefly about the IRTF and the IETF, talk about what CFRG does, what its charter is, how we work, what we're currently working on, and actually, most importantly of all, how you can get involved, because we need help. We need lots and lots of help. So here's a picture. This is the internet, okay? You are here, and the objective of the IETF and the IRTF is to basically to make this work. Security is a consideration, but it's not the only consideration when it comes to making the internet work. So this is kind of a grand aim, and this is like a very important thing to do, right? We all like being able to download movies and surf and chat to each other online, and the IETF and the IRTF are making that happen for you. Okay, so maybe think about how can you do something to give something back, perhaps. So the IETF's focus is very much on short-term engineering issues, making better protocols, making more interesting features for the internet, whereas the IRTF, which has almost an identical logo, is more research-oriented and is taking a longer-term perspective. So it's really about, it's a great place where cryptographers can play, actually, because there really is interesting research to be done. There are interesting research problems that arise out of the internet that are related to cryptography, and I'll explain some of them as we go along. The only difference in the logo I can see is that they changed the E to an R, and then they added these empty diamonds instead of the solid diamonds. And I don't know what that means. I really don't know, but it's a nice logo. So the IRTF, Internet Research Task Force, is organized into research groups, or RGs, research groups. And the CFRG is one such research group. So CFRG stands for Crypto Forum Research Group, which is a real mouthful, so we just say CFRG and we draw a shift register. So what do we exist to do? I've got a lot of text on this slide and the next slide, so I'll read it out, but you can read along with me. So it's a general forum for discussing and reviewing uses of cryptographic mechanisms, both for network security in general and for the IETF in particular. So it's focused on crypto for networking and making networks more secure. The CFRG serves as a bridge between theory and practice. That's music to my ears. Bringing new cryptographic techniques to the internet community and promoting an understanding of the use and applicability of these mechanisms via informational RFCs. I'll explain what an informational RFC is in a minute. But basically, here in CFRG, we are trying to understand research problems coming out of the internet, coming from the IETF actually, and trying to help solve those problems and bring useful theory to bear on the problem of making the internet more secure. So it's kind of important. Goes on to say the charter, our goal is to provide a forum for discussing and analyzing general cryptographic aspects of security protocols and to offer guidance on the use of emerging mechanisms and new uses of existing mechanisms. So this is all kind of motherhood and apple pie. We're going to try and do crypto better for the internet. The last part of the charter, though, is the thing that makes CFRG a little bit distinct, which is this last part. So IETF working groups, these are these people who are more engineering focused. Basically, they're going to occasionally want to develop protocols and deploy those protocols and use cryptography in those protocols. And the idea of CFRG is that it's a place where those people can come to get advice about how to do crypto properly. Because as we all know, and as we heard in Phil's talk, it's easy to do crypto wrongly, or it's easy to be fooled into doing it wrongly, okay? To be subverted, let's say. Sometimes this process does work well. So sometimes a working group will come to us and ask us for advice or input on whatever they're doing. It doesn't always happen. So sometimes our review is retrospective and we're kind of picking up the pieces and sweeping up the mess after something bad has been standardized. Okay, so a recent example where this has worked well is the TLS working group, which Eric Riscorla was talking about just before the coffee break. Standardizing TLS 1.3 came to CFRG with a formal request for advice about elliptic curve cryptography. Specifically, they wanted to find out whether there were new elliptic curves that they should be using, maybe with better security or better implementation security. And they also wanted to know about how to do Diffie-Hellman and digital signatures to avoid attacks and to reflect the latest research in this field. And there has been a lot of research in the field of elliptic curve cryptography over the last 10 or 15 years. So this was an opportunity for the TLS working group to refresh the crypto that it was doing and to use the latest, greatest stuff as approved by the research community. So this is a recent example where we received a formal request and we've responded to that request by doing a whole lot of work, having a lot of arguments and discussion, sometimes friendly, sometimes not so friendly. I'll talk about that aspect in a moment too. To come up with some recommendations for the TLS working group. And actually those recommendations that we've made now, or in the process of making, will end up affecting whole swathes of the internet. Lots and lots of internet protocols will end up using the new curves that we have been recommending or developing. Okay. In other cases where we don't get a direct request, people who are doing the crypto or need some crypto review will get gently steered towards the CFRG. Or sometimes they'll get dragged towards the CFRG, kicking and screaming, okay, depending on their attitude towards crypto, by people in the IETF, by the leadership of the IETF. So the main sort of overall CFRG process is roughly the following. We'll start with something called an internet draft, and this is a very basic raw text document that describes a particular algorithm or a protocol or a concept. And through a process that's run by CFRG, we'll end up with something called an RFC. RFC stands for Request for Comments. So for example, the TLS 1.0 protocol is specified in an RFC. I think it's RFC 2246, which goes into infinite amounts of detail about exactly how TLS 1.0 works. TLS 1.3, which is currently in development under the leadership of Eric, will end up being an RFC, probably RFC 8000 and something. I don't know whether Eric has a number in mind. Is he still here? Has he disappeared? Do you have a number in mind for what 1.3 is going to be? Probably trying to end in 4.6. So there's some numerology that goes on in deciding which standards get which numbers, okay? And this is de facto an internet standard, but I've put an asterisk there because an RFC is not really an internet standard. It really is, technically, a request for further comment. So RFCs can be updated, they can be obsoleted, there can be errata found in RFCs and they get fixed later. Okay, so the main CFRG objective then is to take useful looking internet drafts and turn them via a process of review and refinement into complete, clear, well-specified RFCs by tapping into the expertise of the community. Okay, and the community, as I'm trying to extol the virtues of working with CFRG, could include all of you if you wanted to be involved. I'll explain about how to get involved in just a moment. So, in a little bit more detail, this is a very boring slide, but it sort of says how the process works, okay? So basically, an internet draft might be adopted by the CFRG. That means that the chairs of the CFRG decide that this would be a good thing to have, or there's consensus behind the idea of adopting a draft. Then the chairs will manage the process of taking that draft, making sure it gets reviewed, making sure it gets refined properly in response to the feedback that comes from people who read the draft, and eventually get consensus for what's in that draft. So there'll be an evolution through different versions. Some documents go through many, many different drafts. So for example, TLS 1.3, which is not a CFRG draft, it's from the TLS working group, is currently at draft 12 and about to be at draft 13. Okay, so that's not untypical for the number of iterations that a document goes through. Each time, hopefully, getting better, getting more refined, more detailed, more clear. And eventually, the ID may become an informational RFC. So that's a particular type of RFC, an informational one, which the IRTF is somehow allowed to produce. And the typical amount of time this takes, well, it might happen very quickly. It can happen in a matter of months. It might take a year. Some of the elliptic curve stuff that we're doing has taken more like 18 months, actually. It's been quite a long, slow process to get there. So things do move fairly quickly. If you compare this to something like the AES competition, that entire process took four or 5 years, okay? But we're not trying to design a new block cipher here. We're more or less taking stuff out of the research literature and turning it into internet drafts or and then into RFCs. I should emphasize something. You might put a lot of effort into developing an RFC, and people might be interested in it, but that does not mean that it will instantly be adopted in a widespread fashion on the internet. Okay? Just because you have an RFC to your name doesn't mean that the whole internet is running on your technology, but that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so who are the chairs currently? There's this chap here, a good-looking guy called Alexei Melnikov, and he's been involved in the IETF for many, many years. He's worked in lots of different parts of IETF and IRTF. He's kind of serving a life sentence in IETF, if you like. And the great thing about Alexei is he knows how it all works. Okay, he knows all the processes inside out. And that means that he keeps this guy straight, right? He keeps me moving in the right direction. So I'm very much still learning the process ropes. I hope you like this is called a hero shot, apparently. This is this kind of photograph. And so our role is really to try and build consensus, okay? So ideally, all of the processes that we run are consensus-based, whether or not we should adopt a document, whether certain changes should be made to a document before it becomes an RFC. Our job then is to guide the group towards consensus. In the IETF, achieving at least rough consensus is required. Rough consensus means that most people agreed, there was a minority who didn't, okay? And then you can be in the rough. You can be in that group who didn't agree. In IRTF, rough consensus is preferred. Consensus would be ideal, but actually, at the end of the day, the decision-making ultimately resides with the chairs. So if the chairs want to do something, they can just do it and say, this is what we're doing. This is the direction we're going in, which you think would give us enormous power as chairs, but it doesn't, okay? Because you can't do something without taking the rest of the research group with you. Because if you go in a direction that the majority of the research group disagrees with, they'll just go and do something else, or they'll stop helping you develop drafts, or there'll be a revolution and you'll be kicked out. Okay, that can happen. All right, so we have a certain amount of power to guide things in certain directions, but we certainly don't have ultimate control over what happens in the research group. A few comments about the resources that are available to us as a standards-making body. And the answer is, we don't have a huge amount of resource, and the problem that we're trying to solve is very large and complicated. The work is really volunteer-driven, so I go to these IETF meetings, which happen 3 times a year. The last one was in Buenos Aires, as you heard. The next one will be in Berlin in July. After that, I'm not sure where it was, where it will be. This time last year, it was in Hawaii, for example. Seoul in Korea, okay. So it moves around the world 3 times a year, and about 1,000 or 1,200 people turn up at these meetings, and there's a lot of discussion goes on, but it's all completely volunteer-driven. I mean, obviously, if you're working for Mozilla or for Google or something, then somebody's paying for your ticket. If you're an academic, you've got to think about, if I get involved in this, how am I going to fund my participation? How am I going to pay the airfares to get to all of these events? And that's, you should compare that to the kind of resources that a NIST-style organization would have, not just NIST, but other standards bodies too, that might have funding to run the competition or to run the process, to fund a secretariat, to manage all the documents and the people, and so on. So one idea that we have in development to help us get over this resource constraint is to set up a CFRG review panel, and this would be a circle of experts who would help the chairs with, be available to be called upon to provide reviews on drafts and to make recommendations. But this is still an idea in development. It needs more discussion and refinement before we decide to go with that. This would be a slightly unusual thing for a research group to do in the IRTF. Okay, so now we come to this important part of the talk where I tell you why it's great to get involved in CFRG and why you should join, okay? So here comes the advertising. You're going to help make the internet more secure. That's got to be a good thing, right? I hope you all enjoyed Phil's talk where he talked about the kind of challenges that we face. You hear this afternoon from Dan Bernstein about subversion of standardization processes. We have some quite powerful adversaries that we're trying to work against, okay? If you're an academic, I'm talking mostly to the academics in the room, but also I guess people in industry too, you might be required as part of your evaluation to demonstrate the impact of your research, right? That's certainly the case for UK academics these days, maybe not in other countries. This is a great way to demonstrate the impact of your research, to make your research make a real difference in the world, and to be able to demonstrate that you helped make that happen. Okay, so that can be useful for funding proposals, for evaluations in your university, or for national evaluations, particularly in the UK, for example. Okay, you might actually learn something as well. In particular, you might learn about why crypto is hard in the real world, why it's hard to get new crypto deployed, why it's hard to get rid of old crypto, why it's difficult to persuade network engineers that in CCA security really matters. Okay, that's the kind of thing that you learn. And that's actually quite useful if you maybe don't want to spend your entire life in academia, but want to end up working in the industry. You'll then be equipped with the tools that you can use to help people understand how to do cryptography properly in industry. Okay? And finally, and most importantly, and reiterating, you get to make a difference in the real world. And you might not want to do that, that's absolutely fine. You can stay in your ivory tower, perfectly insulated from the real world forever if you want. But there is a real world out there, and it's a very interesting place to engage with. So I encourage you to think about doing that. However, there are disbenefits too, right? It's not all positive. Phil in his talk referred to some of the feedback that he got on one of the documents he wrote way back in the early 1990s. And there are these, what you might call, colorful characters from the internet who pop up, right? And who say, why don't we derive the RSA encryption key from the DES key and then make the DES key public and then everybody can find everybody's keys or something. Something completely bonkers, completely nonsense from a cryptographic perspective, right? Or they might have passionate beliefs about the fact that RC4 is actually an okay algorithm, okay? And now we know really it's not. Or they might have passionate beliefs about how networks should work and how networks should interoperate with each other, which is somehow antithetical to what you want to do cryptographically. So you might find yourself in conflict with people who are not cryptographers, but who are extreme experts when it comes to networking. And you might find that they know a lot more than you do about networking, and you have to somehow find a middle ground between the two opposing views. Phil's not here anymore, is he? So he can't defend himself if I criticize him. One thing that Phil did was he did engage in the early 1990s, particularly trying to help make IPsec better. IPsec is a beast of I don't know if any of you know IPsec, but I mean, it's like 350 pages of specification, right? And it's really hard going. It's really tough to read. And Phil had a go 20 odd years ago and then stopped, okay? One of the main points I want to make here, I don't think I have it explicitly, well, it's kind of here. You can't send a single email and then disappear and hope that you will make a change in the world. If you want to bring about a better type of cryptography deployed on the internet, you have to engage repeatedly over months or even years. And that means monitoring mailing lists. It means responding to emails, no matter how silly those emails are and how crazy the person is and how bonkers their idea is. You have to respond politely and explain why they're wrong. And then the next week, you might have to do the same thing all over again. And you might have to do it the month after that to a different person. Okay? And that's necessary in order to bring about change and to build consensus for your ideas. And you know, that's very painful. And what that's going to do is going to take you away from writing your next research paper. Okay? So you have to think about, how are you personally incentivized? What is it that floats your boat? What is it that gets you out of bed in the morning? Is it writing the next research paper and getting to stand on the stage at Crypto? That could be important to you. It might be important in your career. Or are you also interested in making a change in the world, right? Because if you stand on that stage at Crypto and give that talk, maybe 400 people will see you talk. And they might go away impressed with your technical prowess, your ability to prove a theorem. Imagine, though, making a change to a protocol that billions of people use every single day. They might not ever know that you did it, but you will have the satisfaction of knowing that you did it. Okay? So I want to emphasize here that there's huge potential to make a difference, but there's also a personal cost involved if you want to get involved. Okay, moving along. What are we doing currently in CFRG? Well, there's a bunch of different things that we're looking at. Here's a list here. I won't go through these in detail. I will point out here that we are not necessarily just going to invent new crypto on our own. We're also keeping an eye on what's happening elsewhere. So the password hashing competition ran for quite some period of time, and it came up with a winner, Argon 2, and CFRG is in the process of adopting that as a CFRG document and turning it into, hopefully one day, turning it into an RFC. Phil said earlier that maybe this was an example where we're only now really figuring out what password hashing is all about and what the security issues are. And to some extent, I agree with him, but you cannot wait forever to make your standards. At some point, you just have to get on and do it because the field is mature enough, you have a reasonable understanding of what's happening, and because the world wants to have better password hashing mechanisms. So we better get on and standardize them. The last point here is also important. We're in the process now, as a group, of trying to figure out what we want to do in the post-quantum world. We're already looking at some hash-based signature schemes, but there's a sort of general question here about how far do we want to go in driving the process of developing post-quantum cryptographic standards for the internet. And actually, Tanya and others, Mike Mosca, will talk more about this, and Lily Chen will talk more about this later on this afternoon. Okay, coming to my last couple of slides, if the chairs will permit me just a couple of moments. How can you get involved? It's actually really simple. There's going to be a meeting this Thursday at 1:30 p.m., so 13:30, in the main hall in this building somewhere, wherever we are for the sessions. The CFRG will be meeting there for roughly 2 hours, and we're going to have some presentations on memory hard functions for password hashing. I hope we're going to have a presentation on AES GCM SIV, which is an authenticated encryption mode being proposed by Google and Intel, and also a presentation on hash-based signatures. It's quite hard to say. The next CFRG physical meeting then will be at the IETF meeting in Berlin. You can read about that meeting here. If you fancy coming to Berlin in July, I'm told it's very nice there. A lot of the work of the CFRG, though, happens on the mailing list. You don't have to come to the physical meetings. I mean, that costs real money to do. I understand that. So have a dig around on the mail archive for CFRG. You just have to Google CFRG mail archive. You don't even have to write down this URL. And then subscribe to the CFRG mailing list. It's a fairly low volume list, something like, I don't know, 25, 30 messages per week. So it's not high volume, okay? It's low volume, high quality, I hope. And then the other thing you can do is you can ask me anything. I'm very happy to do a kind of a 4-day AMA here at Eurocrypt this week. Okay, so just catch me and ask me any aspect of CFRG, and I'll be very happy to explain how things work. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention, and I've made a very special little animation here. So those of you who know linear feedback shift registers will appreciate this. And here we go. CFRG becomes IETF or IRTF. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was impressive. So thank you very much for this very clear presentation of CFRG, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity also for people who would like to get involved at some point in the emergence of new, crypto standards. To go to this meeting on Thursday,
sure.
which happens to be here this week. So
yeah, no registration is required. You just turn up and observe. Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have time for questions, or?
I think we have time for questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any questions? Sure.
Thanks, Pascal. Hi, Kenny. Yeah, very impressive talk.
Thank you.
And one question, Phil, in his talk, he mentioned ignore NSA's recommendation about quantum, post-quantum.
Right.
And he also shared his view about standardizes. The post-quantum crypto is a bit too early. Mm-hmm. But your group already started. You probably in leading. What's your comments about this? Shall we ignore NSA? I don't mind ignore NSA, but I don't mind whether we do standardize it or not.
Okay, so I don't want to preempt the talks this afternoon that we'll talk in much more detail about post-quantum. There'll be 3 talks, I think. I can tell you CFRG's view. We think that the field of hash-based signatures is already quite mature. Much, much more mature, for example, than public key encryption based on lattices or based on codes, which are the sort of 2 main competing approaches, where, to be frank, the research community often shies away from defining concrete security parameters for their schemes because they don't want to have their schemes broken, right? There's a challenge to the academic community. I'm in the academic community too, by the way, but I really challenge you all to stop ducking the problem of setting parameters for your schemes. Some people in the room are already doing it properly and actually saying, okay, this is what my dimension is going to be, this is how big Q is going to be, and so on and so forth. But people really need to set targets so that cryptanalysts can get busy. So hash-based signatures, I think, are quite mature, and we're progressing, making quite good progress there. But I think NIST has got the right kind of time horizon on standardizing other types of post-quantum algorithm. So I think their process will run until, Lily will correct me, but even the early 2020s, I think, or maybe late 20-teens before it's finished. And I think that's about the right amount of time to enable us to really iron out all of the bugs and understand what we're getting. Should we follow full and ignore NSA? No, because I think that we have to apply what you might call a precautionary principle, which says that there's a risk that large-scale quantum computing might happen, and we have to be ready in case that risk becomes a reality. And as many people in the room know, it can take years upon years to deploy a cryptographic standard, and to get rid of stuff that would be insecure. Okay, so I think applying the precautionary principle means that you really have to start thinking about these things now. There's also the angle that maybe your adversary is recording your traffic now, okay, in order to break it later once they have quantum algorithms available. So if I can record your Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and later in 20 years' time using a quantum computer, I can solve the discrete log problem, then I can read today's traffic in 20 years' time. And that's actually a realistic threat. That's actually for particular types of traffic.
I think there's another question for Kenny.
Is Tanya going to correct me now?
No, don't want to correct you. It's just a quick comment. Of course, I have much more time this afternoon. I think NSA is getting unfairly credited for having done something on post-quantum because, I mean, they came like 10 years late to the party. I mean, people were working on this, and suddenly last summer they said, oh yeah, post-quantum. I mean, it's giving them way too much credit to say that they alerted people to it.
Oh, Tanya. I think what we should say is that the party has been running for 10 years, but it's been a pretty exclusive party for most of that time. And the community is certainly growing now. So I think you would be the first to tell me that in Japan there were more than several hundred people at the PQC conference. So that's fantastic. But I think the NSA announcement maybe didn't tell us anything new as a cryptographic community, but it made a big difference to lots of people who don't understand crypto. Right? So the wider security community suddenly started to get an awareness of this, what the impact would be for cryptography of quantum computing. Eric.
Hi. I guess certainly I will tell you that in the sort of broader community, a lot of people started asking. I mean, obviously we were aware of quantum computers as an idea, but like a lot of people started asking, what the hell does this mean? One thing I'd actually ask about, and maybe you have some thoughts, maybe you can tell us if the CFRG take this up, but if the CFRG has any recommendations to make on the, what people should be doing in the meantime while the algorithms are not available, or how worried we should be, or any of those things. Those would be, I mean, even if all you said was, we've looked at this and it's a very real threat, but unfortunately we can't tell you what to do, that would be helpful. Okay. I think that right now probably is just about the answer. But there are people behind you with their hands up who might want to say something. Tyler, do you want to say something about that?
No, not about that. I have another question. So, to what extent does the CFRG interact with other standards bodies, like ISO and,
We're not. So the IRTF is not allowed to have liaison, official formalized liaison with other standards bodies, because it's not a standards body, because it's the research task force. So whenever we get a liaison request, we have to give it to IETF and let them deal with it. Of course, there are all kinds of informal contacts going on all of the time, and as you would expect, at events like this and elsewhere, and over email and over voice. So I think we're in pretty good touch with the relevant people, for example, at NIST, but there's not a formal relationship because we're not allowed to have one.
Okay.
John?
Oh, okay. I was just going to point out, to add to Tanya's comment, at NIST we had several people who were working on post-quantum stuff before the NSA announcement, and this is something that a lot of people in the community have been thinking about. However, the NSA announcement really got everybody's attention. It made it easier to get funding. It made it easier to get approval to work on things, or enough interest that you could actually make a case to people that it made sense. And this is not my area. I'm not really involved in any of this, but I know we've had people working on this, working at NIST for several years before.
That's absolutely my perception too, and that's what I was trying to convey in my previous answer. Perhaps not as smoothly as you have done it.
Okay. So we should leave some questions, for later. We have the all day to discuss some more about quantum safe crypto and other related issues. I think we should move on with the program. Thank you very much again, Kenny.
Thank you.